All right, let's get right into this explainer. Today, we're opening up the dossier on one of the absolute most formidable figures in all of mythology. Usually, when we think of Poseidon, we picture this calm king sitting peacefully under the waves. But the source material, it paints a way more intense picture. We're talking about a terrifying, totally unpredictable force of nature. God of the sea, sure, but also storms, wealth, charm, and even earthquakes. So, who truly rules the ancient oceans? It's a question that brings us face to face with a deity of just immense raw power. Imagine you're an ancient sailor, right? You're looking out at this dark, storm-tossed horizon. You weren't just looking at water. You were looking at him. But how did the ancients actually view this ruler of the deep? Okay, let's really dive into this, because to truly understand Poseidon, we've got to look way beyond just sea god and look at the actual titles given by the people who worshipped him. He was the Earth Shaker. They literally believed he caused the terrifying earthquakes that would rock the ancient world, and he was the tamer of horses, which really highlights his fierce connection to these powerful animals. So he wasn't just about water, he was a god of immense terrestrial power too. To get a real feel for his character, let's look at his core stats, so to speak. His iconic symbols fire off a crystal-clear message of dominance. You've got the famous trident alongside fish, dolphins, horses, and bulls. And as for what he actually looked like, the texts describe him as this strikingly muscular, handsome youth, maybe around 20 years old, recognizable by his thick, curly hair. This is a god built in the image of pure vitality and unstoppable force. To grasp the sheer scope of this mythological giant, we're breaking his dossier into 4 quick parts. First, the Earthshaker's domains. Second, a bizarre origin story. Third, the divine family tree. And fourth, rivalries and lost cities. All right, starting off with Section 1, the Earthshaker's domains. So Poseidon actually enjoyed a pretty unique dual residency. His vast primary kingdom was obviously the ocean itself, but he also held a highly coveted seat way up high above the clouds as one of the 12 Olympians. Essentially, he bridged the gap between the impenetrable depths of the sea and the absolute highest peaks of divine power. And his domain wasn't just geographical, it evolved over time. This historical timeline grounds the myth in actual archaeological reality. If we look at ancient Linear B tablets from the Bronze Age, specifically in places like Pylos and Thebes, we see that Poseidon was worshipped as a primary, main deity long before the standard Olympian pantheon was even fully formed. It was only later that he was integrated into the Greek pantheon as the brother of Zeus and Hades, which carries right up through the era of Plato's famous writings. Moving on to Section 2, a bizarre origin story. And actually, what's really interesting about this next part is just how strange his beginning really was. Think of this as basically a survival guide for a baby god. Poseidon's father, the Titan Cronus, had this terrible habit of swallowing his children whole just to prevent them from eventually overthrowing him. So, according to local legends, Poseidon's mother, Rhea, had to get very creative. Step 1. Hide the infant Poseidon safely in a flock of sheep. Step 2. To fool her husband, she pretended she had given birth to a baby horse, a foal, and gave that to Cronus to swallow instead. I mean, it's a ridiculous trick, but hey, it worked. Poseidon actually survived his father's wrath. Now for Section 3, the divine family tree. Let's look at his factions and allies. This table lays out his immediate inner circle. Beyond his parents Cronus and Rhea, just look at those siblings. Standing right alongside Zeus and Hades, Poseidon formed a third of this ultimate power trio that completely dominated the Greek pantheon. And right beside him, down in the depths, was his primary consort, Amphitrite. And that legacy continued through an incredibly diverse lineup of offspring, both famous and, well, pretty infamous. We've got the great hero Theseus, the merman Triton, and the terrifying Cyclops Polyphemus. Then there's Belus, Agenor, and Neleus. Oh, and you'll probably notice the name Atlas on this list. It is super crucial to point out from our source material that this specific Atlas, Poseidon's son, is completely distinct from the famous Titan who holds up the world. So definitely don't get those two mixed up. Poseidon's influence was so vast it couldn't even be contained by Greek culture alone. When the Roman Empire rose to power, they adapted him into their own equivalent deity, Neptune. The name's changed, sure, but that raw, pure awe for the sea god, that remained absolutely constant across cultures. Which brings us to our final chapter, Section 4, Rivalries and Lost Cities. Now, despite being famously temperamental and highly prone to causing massive earthquakes whenever he got angry, Poseidon actually had a very protective side. The epic poet Homer recorded specific hymns praising Poseidon as a vital, steadfast guardian of multiple Hellenic cities. So the ancient Greeks relied on him just as much as they feared him. But he didn't always get what he wanted. His legends are just full of these dramatic contrasts. On the one hand, he famously competed to become the patron deity of the great city of Athens, but he ultimately lost that contest to the goddess Athena. However, what he lost in Athens, he more than made up for with another piece of legendary real estate, a place far, far more mysterious. And this brilliantly illustrates his power, because that domain was none other than Atlantis. According to the ancient texts Timaeus and Critias by Plato, this legendary utopian island was Poseidon's chosen territory. Plato's writings forever cemented him as the undisputed ruler of history's absolute most enigmatic lost civilization. So what does this all mean? The crucial takeaway here is that when we look at the Earthshaker, we are literally looking at early human history trying to make sense of the world. How did ancient civilizations use these incredibly complex, temperamental gods to explain terrifying, unpredictable natural disasters like sudden storms and violent earthquakes? Poseidon wasn't just a character in some story. He was their explanation for the chaotic forces of nature itself. It really leaves you wondering, how much of our own modern understanding is shaped by the stories we tell today? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the myths that shape our world.